You step into the hollow before dawn. The air is thick, too thick for morning. It clings to your skin like something unfinished, as if the woods themselves have exhaled in your direction but are waiting to inhale again. You're not walking on a path. You're walking on memory, damp, uneven, stitched together by roots that were never meant to be walked on. Ahead, the ridge breaks open just enough for the cabin to appear. Half buried in the hillside, it doesn't sit on the land. It sinks into it like it was trying to hide and failed halfway. The walls sag, but not from rot. From holding too much. Pressure bends them inward, like breath drawn in and never released. There are no windows, no cracks for the wind to slip through, no seams where light might escape. The door is shut with a lock you can't open from this side. But someone did. Once. At your feet. A splintered sign buried beneath pine needles. The letters are worn smooth, but you can still make out the words if you squint hard enough. Keep the blood close. Keep the eyes turned inward. You don't hear birds. You don't hear water. What you hear is breath that isn't yours. Slow, shallow, just beyond the door. And what you see, carved into the center of the wood, aren't initials. They're faces. Dozens of them. Each etched with the same shape. The same eyes. The same mouth open mid-scream or mid-song. You step back. And that's when you see them. Two children. Still as bone. Standing just at the tree line, no shoes, identical in height, in frame, in silence. They do not blink. They do not shift. Only their heads move slowly, tilting in opposite directions, as if to mirror each other, or split something between them. Then a whisper, not spoken, but felt, slipping down your spine like cold water. Would you enter a home where every child looked exactly the same? And no one had a name? In 1911, a doctor did. He left behind one letter. 6 pages. Every page ending with the same line. Do not let them out. But someone did. And that's why the lights don't work here. That's why the ground sinks in certain places. That's why the mirrors are always turned toward the wall. If these walls could speak, they wouldn't beg to be remembered. They'd beg you to forget. They were never supposed to have a name. The further you go into the hills, the more the land forgets how to welcome you. Fences rot inward. Trees grow too close together. Old church bells lie face down in the mud, as if the ground itself turned them silent. You pass abandoned coal carts, rail lines swallowed by moss, and you start to realize this place wasn't abandoned. It was left behind on purpose. At the heart of that leaving was a family. No surname that ever stuck. No signature that matched. No burial plot with a stone. And yet, everyone here remembers them. They speak of the ridge not in stories but in warnings. Don't follow the dogs past the cedar break. Don't go near the house with 3 chairs and no table. Don't answer if you hear 2 voices saying the same thing in different tones. The documents say nothing. No birth certificates. No school records. No doctor visits. Not a single entry in the 1910, 1920, or 1930 federal census. The land was claimed. Taxes were paid. But no name was ever listed. Only a parcel number scrawled in red pencil. Repeated 3 times in a circle like someone trying to trap it on paper. And yet, they were seen. Once in 1937, when a traveling pastor claimed 2 barefoot boys followed his wagon for 7 miles and vanished at the bridge. Again in 1949, by a forest surveyor who saw them crouched in a dry creek bed, whispering the Lord's Prayer backward. And once more in 1964, filed in a police report never meant to be made public. A woman driving alone on Route 15 swerved and crashed. When asked why, she said, "I thought they were mannequins, standing in the road." But then their eyes moved. The report ends mid-sentence. They were never named in the logs, only described. Same height, same clothing, always barefoot, always silent. Not twins, the officers wrote, just repeated. Not lost boys, echoes. And still, the official line was silence. The state archived the sightings as hysteria, chalked it up to isolation, poor lighting, faulty memory. But in the local record halls, where paper yellows before it's red, there are notes. Handwritten ones. marginal scribbles in ledgers that shouldn't have room for them. Saw them again. By the fence line. Didn't move. Didn't blink. Same ones. Older now. Or maybe not. These aren't legends. They aren't ghosts told around campfires. They're shadows pinned to paper by people who had nothing to gain by writing them down, and everything to lose by pretending they didn't see. Because when every official record is wiped clean, all that remains is memory. And memory is where they survive. If even a fragment of this family story has already chilled you, imagine what it cost the people who lived it. Don't scroll past. Let them be heard. Subscribe to Echoes of Time. There are places on the Tennessee-Kentucky border where the land forgets what year it is. Where names do not end, they loop, fold back into themselves like roots curling inward. In these folds, the story of the Carlin Line begins, not with love, not with birth, but with ownership. In 1872, 4 families claimed adjoining parcels near the Upper Cumberland Plateau. The land was poor, rocky, shaded too long by ridgeline and fog. But it was theirs, deeded in full, signed in blood when ink ran dry. And from that moment, a quiet law took hold. Not written in courthouse ink, but passed from tongue to tongue, mother to son. Keep the land in the blood. They meant it literally. By 1884, a pattern emerged in the tax records, one that no official dared acknowledge. The same surnames appeared on every line: Carlin, Amos, Weatherly, Yates. But the marriage records told another story. There were no new names. Children were born, but no brides were ever registered from outside the hollow. Baptismal logs showed repeated names. In one church registry, a single given name, Elias, was used for 5 boys born within 3 years. The explanation offered by elders: it keeps the lineage clean. A son inherits what isn't diluted. It was called pedigree protection, a practice rooted in fear not of outsiders but of division. Land that leaves the family never comes back. And so the family must circle its own blood, tie it in knots, braid it tighter each generation until even the names become echoes. In 1891, a rare court case broke the silence. A man named Jonah Carlin attempted to marry outside the ridge. A girl from Perry County, light-haired, educated, her father a tanner. When Jonah brought her home, the deed to his portion of the land was immediately contested by his own uncle. The claim: he broke the bloodline. The judge, an aging man with no children of his own, ruled in favor of the uncle. The land returned to the family. The girl vanished from public record a month later. By 1905, no one even tried to leave. In a ledger stored beneath the Hyden County Courthouse, never digitized, never cited, there is a list. Just 1 page. For columns. No headers. Just names written again and again. Some struck through. Some underlined twice. A few marked with a figure-8 loop. The final name reads, L. May Carlin. No date beside it. Just 1 word in the margin, written in a different hand. Builder. And in that single word lies the blueprint of what followed. Because the Carlin Line didn't just preserve blood. It replicated it, repeated it, until the people inside that hollow were no longer families but reflections. No one married, no one buried, only passing the same features, the same eyes, the same silences, from one generation to the next like heirlooms. This isn't the kind of history you'll find in textbooks. But it was lived, quietly, painfully, deliberately. And if you won't speak for them, who will? Subscribe to Echoes of Time. Help us dig where others won't. From 1910 to 1940, the Carlin Line ceased to exist, at least officially, for federal censuses came and went. Enumerators walked every road, knocked every door, cataloged every face. But not theirs. Not one Carlin, Amos, Weatherly, or Yates appeared on any form submitted from the upper ridge during those 30 years. Not as heads of household, not as children, not as laborers or pensioners or widows. Nothing. To the federal government, the hollow was empty. But the hollow was never empty. In the school attendance logs of Clay County, there is a faint pencil note, barely legible now, next to a line left blank beneath the year 1922. It reads, 2 boys seen near the riverbed. Same face, different clothes, wouldn't enter. The teacher filed no report, but she never erased the note. In 1929, a welfare agent tasked with locating children in need of vaccination and nutritional aid climbed the ridge with a mule, 2 blankets, and a ledger. She never completed her route. When asked why, she simply said, "The children watched me from the porch, but they never moved. They never blinked. They just copied." She was reassigned by spring. And in 1935, buried in a stack of outreach reports now crumbling in the archives of the Kentucky Public Health Initiative, there is one line among thousands. The children did not speak. They only echoed. No case number. No follow-up. The report ends there. Yet during that same time, those 3 decades of silence, dozens of local oral histories speak of figures seen just beyond the tree line. Of girls who came home from school and found muddy prints in their bedrooms. Of hunters who heard 2 sets of breathing where no one stood. Of dogs that refused to bark, froze in place, or simply ran. A house was said to exist at the end of a path no longer on any map. A one-room structure without mirrors. No chimney smoke, no electric lines. Locals called it the folded house. Because the windows faced inward. Because the porch curved like a question mark. Because nothing inside it grew old. According to an interview recorded in 1968 with one of the last surviving members of the original surveying team, time didn't move in that place. It doubled back. You could leave and swear it was Sunday, but your boots would still be wet from Friday. There were no birthdays, no mail, no firewood purchased from town. And yet something remained there. They didn't participate in the Depression. They didn't fight in the wars. They didn't register, vote, or marry. But they watched. They always watched. And the only proof we have that they were ever real is that they were never counted. How can a family vanish across 4 censuses, yet still be seen watching from the ridge? If you're not subscribing to Echoes of Time yet, tell us why in the comments. But be honest, are you afraid of knowing too much? There are bodies that grow wrong not because of injury, but because the blueprint has been copied too many times. In the margins of forgotten medical journals, those never reprinted, never cited, you find warnings. Not about plague, not about malnutrition, but about repetition. One such warning came in 1932. A paper published in the Southern Clinical Review, circulation limited to a handful of Appalachian physicians, spoke in hushed clinical language about what it called replication error in mountain isolates. It documented children born with fused cranial plates, mirror image deformities, teeth that grew inward, and spinal cords twisted not from trauma but from symmetry. The author never named the county, only referenced a ridge settlement beyond census reach. The phrase used was not genetic disorder. It was systemic feedback through uninterrupted lineage. In other words, blood turned inward, not once, not twice, but over and over again until it became something else entirely. Modern inbreeding coefficients calculate risk after even a single generation of first-cousin union. But what happens when you loop the same blood for 6 generations? What happens when a child is born from a parent who was born from a cousin who was born from an uncle who was also a brother by blood if not by law? You get patterns. Not just in face but in motion, in rhythm, in the eerie sameness of breath taken and released not together, but in sequence. One nurse, in a 1954 field interview, refused to use the word family. She said, "They weren't siblings. They were steps in a ritual. Same jaw, same toe spacing, same murmur in the heart. I didn't deliver children. I delivered reflections." She was paid in cash. No receipt, no record of her visit. Another midwife, anonymous, but believed to be from Wolfe County, described being blindfolded for the final mile of her journey into the ridge. She was guided by a woman's voice, cold, firm, never raised. The cabin was already warm when she arrived. No fire, just heat, as if the house exhaled. She delivered 2 boys. She said they cried once, at the exact same time. Then never again. She was told to leave before nightfall, paid double her usual rate in worn bills. On the way out, she saw a row of identical shoes nailed to the porch beam. All the same size, all facing inward. She never returned. These births were never charted. No umbilical cords bagged. No blood sent to state labs. Only hands paid in silence and eyes that saw too much to speak. They weren't children. They were the blood looping, refusing to die, refusing to evolve, refusing to do anything but repeat. Some people study history to learn how we moved forward, but others study it to see how far back we curled into ourselves. If this story hasn't made you subscribe to Echoes of Time yet, ask yourself, what are you afraid of unearthing? In 1981, a genetics department at a small southern university launched a quiet study. Its goal was unremarkable: to map mitochondrial DNA patterns in rural communities of the Appalachian region. The funding came from a federal health initiative aimed at identifying inherited disorders in areas without regular medical access. It was meant to be routine, but the results were not. Among dozens of samples collected across Kentucky and Tennessee, a cluster emerged: 15 families, all within a 60-mile radius of the Cumberland Plateau. What stood out was not a specific mutation, but its absence. The variation that should exist from mother to daughter, generation to generation, wasn't there. The code repeated itself with uncanny precision. No branching, no drift, only recursion. The lead researcher, a postdoctoral fellow at the time, kept the findings unpublished. But a copy of his draft report, smuggled into an internal university memo archive and later leaked, included a single, chilling annotation in the margins. This isn't a genetic disorder. It's a closed loop. The DNA wasn't just preserved. It was contained, locked into a cycle that made small errors over time, like a photocopy of a photocopy, but refused to introduce anything new. The team found signs of mirrored transcription, identical gene expressions on maternal lines where there should have been difference, eye spacing, bone curvature, even skin cell regeneration showed signs of synchronized decay. One researcher, speaking years later under anonymity, said, "Their genetics weren't just broken, they were copied. Too often, too tightly. It was like someone had taken a mold of a mold and never cleaned the edges." Attempts to trace the samples back to specific individuals failed. Every surname was either forged, misspelled, or entirely absent from property and census records. One file was marked simply, Sample, Echo 7. When the team requested follow-up testing in the field, the funding was revoked. The program ended abruptly. No publication, no peer review, no press release, and the lab where the samples were stored suffered a fire the following spring. The cause was listed as electrical fault, but the cabinet containing the Appalachian vials had been opened before the flames reached it. Nothing inside remained. The lead researcher left academia. His final note to a colleague read, "The blood isn't sick. It's haunted." They weren't tracking disease. They were documenting the persistence of something that should have thinned, broken, evolved. But instead, it echoed through the blood, through the bone, through whatever called itself a name on that ridge. If this was your lineage, would you want it buried? Or would you want someone, anyone, to tell the truth? Subscribe to Echoes of Time. Help this story reach someone who needs to know they weren't alone. They should have disappeared. By 1974, the cabin was gone, the path overgrown, the family name erased or folded into something untraceable. But the silence didn't settle. It shifted, moved with the mist along the tree line. It waited, and then it started watching back. The first report came from a hiker just outside Barrow Creek. He said he saw two boys standing knee-deep in the river, identical in build, dressed in the same coarse brown shirt, both barefoot, both staring into the current as if listening to something beneath it. He called out. Neither boy turned. Only after several minutes, one lifted his hand, not to wave, but to mimic the exact gesture the hiker had just made, like a mirror delayed. The local ranger filed the report as unconfirmed. No search conducted. 2 years later, a schoolteacher in Wolfe County reported seeing a pair of children standing perfectly still beneath a bridge just after sunrise. They weren't wet. They weren't moving, just watching the school bus pass. She said their mouths opened at the same time, but no sound came out. When deputies checked the location an hour later, there were no footprints. Only 2 indentations in the frost, side by side. Still warm. No action taken. By 1989, the sightings grew stranger. A set of trail cam photos submitted anonymously to a wildlife station showed 2 boys, one behind the other, standing at the edge of the frame. Each image, taken 5 seconds apart, showed the boys in the exact same pose, but in each frame they had switched places. No movement captured, just sudden reversals as if time had hiccuped. The station discarded the photos. No investigation followed. But the most harrowing account came in 1991. A forest fire had broken out near Hyden County. A crew was dispatched to build a firebreak along the eastern slope, near the old ridge, where records still labeled the area unmapped. Midway through the operation, a section of the team stopped. Not because of heat or terrain, but because they heard voices. Not screaming, not speaking, crying. They described it as a layered sound, like one cry repeated a half-second after the other. As if someone had pressed replay before the first wail finished. The men scanned the woods. No one in sight. And then, one crew member saw them. 2 children, just inside the smoke, staring with mouths open. No sound from their lips. But the crying continued, perfectly timed. One after the other. Again and again. The fire chief halted advancement. No children were recovered. The cries stopped when the wind changed. The incident was marked in the fire report as acoustic distortion due to terrain. No follow-up. No public record. And yet the sightings never stopped. From 1974 to 2016, nearly 24 reports were filed, each describing the same thing. 2 boys, barefoot, silent, watching, sometimes by the river, sometimes near a road with no houses, sometimes just beyond the trees, visible only when the light bends low. They never move first. They never speak. And yet they are always responding, mimicking, echoing. They shouldn't exist. Not anymore, but they do. And every year they seem a little less like children, and a little more like a pattern trying to remember how to be human. If you've made it this far and still think this is just story, ask yourself, how many stories leave footprints? How many come back? Subscribe to Echoes of Time, or explain in the comments why you'd rather not. Just don't pretend you haven't been seen. In the winter of 1983, the snow in Low Gap came early. By the time the mail carrier reached the edge of the last drivable road, the frost was already glassing over the fence posts. But one letter kept returning to the post office. No response, no collection, no forwarding address, just a name on the envelope. M. Carlin. No first name, no return. Out of protocol, the sheriff was sent to perform a wellness check. What he found would never be included in the official report. The house stood at the edge of a gully, wood warped, porch sagging, no power lines, no smoke. The front door was cracked open, not kicked in, as if whoever left had no reason to close it behind them. Inside, everything was untouched. Dishes stacked, bed made, shoes arranged in mirrored pairs near the fireless hearth. The woman was found in the back room, seated upright, hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were closed. Her mouth was not. Dried blood had run down her chin and soaked the collar of her dress. But there was no wound, no sign of struggle, no sign of pain, just her body and the words behind her, scrawled in black on the warped clapboard wall, written with a shaking hand again and again until the wood split. We are not gone. We are reflection. The handwriting matched entries found in a notebook beneath the bed. A journal of sorts, though its contents were less diary than ritual. Repetition, fragments, a mantra building into something deeper. Beneath the floorboards, officers found disturbed soil. 3 shallow graves, unmarked, side by side. Inside, 3 boys, each the same height, each with identical features, same eye spacing, same ear tilt, same missing left incisor. Different states of decay. No birth certificates. No clothing. No names. The coroner listed the deaths as undetermined. But the report was never entered into the public archive. Instead, the file was stamped with an internal seal. Restricted. Psychological hazard. The sheriff who found the bodies resigned 4 weeks later. He left the state without notice. His only statement, offered to a friend in a bar before leaving. She didn't raise them. She repeated them. No next of kin came forward. No funeral was held. The property was quietly condemned and burned under the pretense of safety concerns. But neighbors said the fire burned white. No smoke, no smell. And afterward, the grass never grew back. Her story was buried with her. Unless you choose to remember it. Subscribe, or at least explain in the comments why you won't. But don't pretend you never heard this. In 2019, a series of Freedom of Information Act requests were submitted to state and federal offices. The queries were simple, searchable. Requests for birth records, land deeds, psychiatric reports, and welfare case files tied to the Carlin Ridge settlement between 1900 and 1980. Each was returned stamped with the same response. No responsive documents found. But in at least 2 cases, the rejection included something unusual. An attached internal memo, mistakenly left unredacted, bearing 5 words that had not appeared in official communications since the 1980s. Do not reopen. Psychological hazard. No further explanation. No case file cited. Just that warning like a doorway nailed shut from the inside. And then came the leak. A plaintext email, circulated anonymously to a message board used by regional folklorists and archivists. No sender address. No metadata. Only a subject line. They didn't vanish. Inside was 1 paragraph. They didn't vanish. They were perfected. The silence was never proof of absence. It was part of the design. The records weren't lost. They were removed. And the family isn't forgotten. They're preserved. In blood, in pattern, in place. The structure is still intact. It's just hidden now. Folded inward. Like a lung no longer breathing, but still holding air. Attempts to trace the IP failed. A week later, the message board shut down without notice. Accounts deleted. Archives wiped. But before it vanished, one user captured a screenshot. It showed the final reply before the forum was taken offline. It read only, "You're looking in the wrong century." Since then, no further documentation has surfaced. FOIA appeals are denied on the basis of national privacy protections. Requests for interviews with state welfare officials are declined. No one will speak on record. And those who might, retired clerks, archivists, former field officers, don't answer their phones anymore. One reporter who attempted to pursue the story was advised, off the record, to redirect her interest. The phrasing used was clinical, cold. Nothing good comes from excavating recursive trauma. That was the term they used. Recursive trauma. Pain folded into itself until it becomes indistinguishable from legacy. Until it becomes a method. Because the Carlin Line didn't disappear. They were silenced with precision. Not lost. Perfected. You don't have to believe everything you hear. But when the silence around a story becomes louder than the story itself, ask why. And ask it here, in the open. Subscribe to Echoes of Time. Because the only thing more dangerous than knowing is choosing not to. Some stories end. This one didn't. Because even if the Carlin bloodline has dissolved, one body buried under another, one name scratched over, one child uncounted, the shape of what they built never left. It shifted, it deepened, it scattered like ash caught in the roots of the forest, waiting for someone to step wrong. You can feel it in the way the trees lean on that ridge, in the way the wind stutters, in the way 2 shadows sometimes fall from a single branch. The bodies may be gone, the land may be condemned, but the design remains. A closed loop, a breath held too long, a name whispered just once, and then again, fainter, slower, slightly off-center, like a voice mimicking itself from memory. They were never trying to survive. They were trying to preserve. Not a family, not a legacy, but a shape, a rhythm, pattern. Because once a pattern is strong enough, it no longer needs people. It moves through places, through time, through silence. And if you listen carefully, in the right hour, on the right slope, you may hear it too. The pause between footsteps, the space between reflections, the same breath taken twice. So ask yourself, if blood can echo, then how far back do you hear it? The state forgot them, but echoes of time won't. You're not watching a ghost story. You're witnessing the final trace of a buried lineage. If that doesn't deserve a place in your memory, what does? Subscribe not for us but for them.